Welcome, welcome everybody to Pianist Academy and another live stream Q&A session. And Happy New Year to everybody. This is our first stream getting back together since December. It's been, I don't know, it may have been like 4 weeks since our last one. At least 3, maybe 4. Sorry to keep everybody waiting, but Happy New Year. I hope 2023 is off to a great start for you. And that would be a great thing. Why don't you, for those of you that are here, drop a line in the chat and say where you're from. And also, do you have any piano-related New Year's resolutions? That could be a fun way to kick us off today. I see we've got a handful of people here already. So be sure and say hi so I know who's here and we can get chatting and talking and all that good stuff. There is no masterclass section in today's live stream, so it's completely up to you to ask whatever questions you have. I can get started with a little bit of stuff, I suppose, if we don't have any. But I'll give people a minute. We have Bernadette. Hello. Happy New Year, Bernadette. Thanks for saying hi in the chat. And Carol. Hi, Carol. Beautiful. Great to see you. Great to see you. Megan's here. Awesome. Nova Scotia. I didn't know that. Megan, you've joined a whole bunch of times. I never knew you were in Nova Scotia. Awesome. Awesome. So, as we all get comfortable and warmed up, at least it's 10 o'clock in the morning where I am, so I've always got my coffee on these live streams. Sir Wolseley is here. Awesome, Sir Wolseley. Good to see you again. So, as we get going, feel free to drop any questions you have. It could be technique, scales, arpeggios, repertoire. It could be questions about composition or arranging or about theory. Really anything at all that you'd like to know, drop it in the chat and we'll have at it. I'll just, whoever drops the first question in the chat, that'll be where we start. Hey, Julio, good to see you, Julio. And I'll just give maybe another 10 or 15 seconds and see if one comes in. Otherwise, I've got a couple things I can talk about here. So, we actually had some snow this morning. Do you like how I give 10 seconds and talk about the weather? It's always a good thing to talk about. We had some snow here in Colorado this morning. It's a cold day again. We had a couple really nice days. It was like, for being a mountain area, it was 50 degrees and beautiful and everything melted and that was great. But this morning, not so much. Okay, I think it's been about 10 seconds. If a question chimes in, I might cut off where I am and just jump into it. But in the meantime, Megan, perfect timing, Megan. Megan asks, who is your favorite composer of all time? That's a really hard question for me to answer, Megan, but it's a great question. So, Megan, while I answer that, drop in the chat who your favorite composer is, either to play and or to listen to, because I know that we're all at different levels here. So sometimes what we really like to listen to, we might not be able to play yet. That's just fine. My favorite composer, I'll give you a couple. I don't know if I can pick one because it kind of changes depending on the day and how I'm inspired. Megan says Chopin to listen to. Chopin is up there for me as well. I've got to say, let's say if I'm going to pick a top 3 composers, it's probably Chopin, Liszt, and Rachmaninoff. Those are going to be my top 3 classical composers for piano. Gosh, I love string writing and orchestral writing by a lot of the English composers. I love Gustav Holst. Love listening to the planets, especially because some of you know my inspiration with like arranging film scores and stuff like that. There's a whole thing I could go into with that. I will if we have time. So Bernadette says, I'm very new to learning piano. Do you have any suggestions for how to learn songs? I'm working on a very easy version of Edelweiss, but it's going slowly. Great question, Bernadette. So, first off, Bernadette, let me know how much time you spend practicing on a regular basis. That'll give me a little bit of help in answering that question. And secondly, how comfortable are you reading notation? You said you're very new to learning piano, so are you feeling like you need to write in the letter names of notes as you go along? Or are you feeling a little bit more comfortable than that? Let's start with those questions if you can get back to me, Bernadette. Edelweiss is a great tune. let's see, if it's in C, it would go. So here we go. Okay, Bernadette says daily for at least half an hour, learning notation, but it's not quick or fluid yet. Okay, that's just fine, Bernadette. Daily is great. So the first thing, and what I would always encourage is as soon as possible while you're learning notation, while you're learning the letter names, also start to learn relationships between intervals. Usually, if you're following like a method book, no matter what method book that is, if it's the, two of the most common ones are Alfred and Faber. There are, of course, others. But if you're following a method book and you're using lesson books to help you learn, they usually don't introduce much about interval reading until kind of later. So the first thing I would do is you probably has you starting, or some pieces have you starting in C 5-finger position. And I have a whole... I love having my own students. If they're complete beginners, we read some music there, but we don't, in particular, spend a lot of time in C 5-finger position. But while you're there, especially if Edelweiss is in C, we want to learn not only C, D, E, F, and G, and what they look like on the page, how middle C is the first ledger line below, and G is the second line up on the staff. It's the one that the treble clef draws a little circle around, right? So not only do we want to have those landmarks, but we also want to start to learn, okay, the distance from, let's say, C to E is a third. It's great if we can identify it and have a definition. But even more important than that, this version starts in E. Okay, Bernadette. Is the first note E? let me know. Hey, Jose. We've got a few other questions here, too, from Sir Wolseley and Julio. I'm going to get to you guys as soon as we finish up with Bernadette. It starts on an E, so that means it's actually in the key of C, Bernadette, because Edelweiss starts on the third of the scale. So if we can learn to read those intervals, like what it looks like for the note to be from middle C to E, one line up, right? And if we can identify, okay, one line to the next line is a third, that's great to know mentally. Go to the piano, and here let's say one line, first ledger line to the first staff line is a third. Feel what that's like, especially between like your thumb and your third finger are going to be the two fingers that usually play those notes. We want to really get a muscle memory in our hands and in our body for what different intervals feel like. So, for example, here, the first line of Edelweiss is probably E, G, D, like that. So we want to be able to see the first note to the second note is an E to a G, and it's a third. It's kind of like what we just talked about. It appears on a different place on the staff, right? We go from the first line of the staff, the bottom line, to the second line, but the interval is the same as going from middle C to E. It's a third. So we can have a little bit of muscle memory, and we can also have a visual memory of what that looks like. And this is a big, big way that I try to teach actually all students, even if I have students that come to me later that are pretty fluent with reading notation. We get into talking a lot about identifying patterns in music. Some of you have probably heard me say this before, but patterns, and the pattern recognition starts with being able to see intervals as they go up and down, and being able to see when scales get used. Those are two huge, huge things. So in Edelweiss, E to G, our first two notes are a third apart. That's cool. Our second two notes, G to D, is a fifth apart. Or, if you look on your page, it's two lines of the staff. There's a line that's skipped, right? And so if we can see when we go from line note to line note and we skip one in the middle, one, it's a fifth, so we know how to talk about it. And two, let's play it on the piano and remind ourselves this is a fifth, both in what it feels like and what it sounds like in our ear, right? That's going to be, I think, a huge thing. It might take a little bit of extra effort right now if it's not a way that you look at music, but it's going to really help speed up reading notation. The more you get used to reading intervals and things like that. Now, Edelweiss is going to have a lot more difficult intervals than, let's say, a really early beginner piece. So if we keep going here, so we have C, and then a fourth, back to E. Well, that'll be okay. So here's another spot for you to look at in Edelweiss, Bernadette. Toward the end of, let's say, the verse. That starts on G, but it just ascends up a C major scale. And we end on C, the first note of the scale. So if we also have some recognition of scales like I just mentioned, like C major, we might not use the same fingers we used to play C major, but one, we know the sound of it, that fits in, right? And two, we're also going to be able to see if we've looked at, or while we practice our scales, if we're watching sheet music that's got all those notes written down, ascending, this is going to match exactly from your piece, from repertoire, it's going to match exactly what's on your scale sheet. So instead of reading 1, 2, 3, 4 notes, all of a sudden we read one idea. We read, this is a C major scale starting on G. Yeah? And then for me, and hopefully for you pretty soon, you just think about that one thing instead of so many other things, right? So I hope that, you said it's a slow process right now, right? And I hope if you change your thinking a little bit like that, that can start to help speed things up. And if you already know the notes, start to apply some of those concepts. Like look for the intervals, look for ways to identify things. We might not be able to identify everything right now, and that's just fine. But wherever we can make those extra landmarks or those extra like mental placeholders and combine that with a little bit of muscle memory and ear memory, that's going to really help speed up our process. It's a great question, Bernadette. I hope you stick around. I hope it was helpful, and I hope you stick around. And as I go through the other questions that came in the meantime, feel free, if you've got another one or a follow-up, absolutely drop it in the chat. Thank you, Bernadette. Let's see. Sir Woolsey says, I've had this question for a while. In a concert, do you change your dynamics? Like, do you still play pianissimo the same, or do you have to play with more volume, thinking to reach everyone? That, Sir Woolsey, is a great question and a quite advanced question. Fabulous that you're thinking about that kind of stuff. I'd be interested to know what cued you to think about that kind of stuff. I'd love to hear what that is for you. So in a concert, Sir Woolsey, it depends. That's the quickest answer. It depends on usually the size of the piano and the size of the space. So, and also, is it solo piano? Is it a solo recital, or is it a performance with orchestra or with a chamber group or something like that? Just curiosity. Well, great. Cool question, Sir Woolsey. So in most concert spaces, let's say that are 300 seats and smaller, so this could be even like a lot of churches. Concerts are given in lots of churches. There are some concert halls that are that size. It's a little rare to have a concert hall that small because it's hard to get it to pay for itself, but there are some. So if it's around that size, there is no change. Most concert halls are going to have, of that size, they're going to have at least a 7-foot piano, if not a 9. If it's a 9-foot piano, there's going to be absolutely no problem reaching everybody. Hey, Zoya, I'm going to get to your question in just a second. Thanks for the question, Zoya. And if it's a 7-foot piano in a small space like that, 300 seats or so, then I'm still not going to change dynamics or anything. There's going to be no issue with reaching the person all the way in the back row. When we get over that size, let's say if I have a 7-foot piano in a 500 or 600 seat hall, I am probably going to play out a little bit more than I normally would. That might also depend on the brand of the piano, because some brands project more easily than others. So that really, really depends. Like if it's a Steinway B, a lot of Steinway Bs, 7-foot piano, have a little bit more mellow and more muted voices, especially when compared to a D, the 9-foot concert grand. And if I have a Mason & Hamlin double B, also a 7-foot piano, another American piano maker, it's got a much bigger voice. So if I'm playing a Mason & Hamlin 7-footer, I'm not going to probably change. If I'm playing a Steinway B, I'm going to bump up dynamics a little bit. And of course, as the halls continue to get bigger and bigger, then we do have to make more and more shifts. The other time that this happens is when we're playing in an ensemble with somebody or a group. So most often, as a collaborative pianist, and Julio, this kind of will lead into Julio's question, so this is great. As a collaborative pianist, most of the time, we're going to need to play less than what we would play solo, because we need the soloist to be heard out and above people, or out and above me, and we need to make sure that we leave space for that. It again depends on the qualities of the soloist's voice. Whether they're a singer or an instrumentalist's voice just means, is it a really bright timbre? Does it have a lot of overtones? Does it ring nicely? Does it project well? If it does all of that, I'm going to be able to play out more. And I'm going to know immediately from the first few notes that they play or sing if that's the case or not. I'm also going to know immediately how the hall responds to them, because most soloists stand in front of the piano. We don't hear, as pianists on the bench, we don't hear music directly off the soundboard of the violin, well, especially violinists. They stand right here, like in front of you, and they point the soundboard of the instrument out toward the audience. So we get not much. We get some. But a lot of what we hear on the bench behind a soloist, especially if they're an instrumentalist, is the hall sending us sound back. So I can try to balance myself. I have to try to balance myself based on what I hear the hall giving me back. That usually means really playing softly. Now, the opposite of that is when we have a pianist that plays with orchestra. If we're a soloist, everything goes up in dynamic a whole bunch. Like pianissimo is probably mezzo forte. We want to try to maintain the quality of pianissimo, the delicateness, but in a lot of ways that's aided just simply by the size of the hall. Even when you have a hall that seats 2,000 or 3,000 people, which is most of the time, a place that an orchestra is going to play, by the time you go from the pianist just to the front row, you're going 20 feet, 30 feet sometimes. Hey, Zach. Hey, Jeffrey. And so there's already a big distance just from stage to first row. Stage to row 10 in a hall that big is like stage to the back of the hall in a 300-seat hall. And so everything just goes way up in volume. And a lot of times it actually flips the opposite. The orchestra has to play a lot less than what they're capable of to try to balance everything out. So that's a great question, Sir Woolsey. And yes, every hall is a little bit different. Every piano is a little bit different. And the only thing that really aids us in concerts like that is whatever experience we've had in the past. That's kind of the only way we know what to expect. Or if you have a teacher and they tell you, okay, this, because of their experience, they can help prep you what to expect, whether that's a specific space or piano or anything like that. Rodri, hey Rodri. I'm going to get to all these questions as soon as I can. This is great. We have a lot of new people today, so cheers, welcome. And I'm just going through the chat as the questions came in. So I'm going to hit Julio's next, and then we're going to get to Zoya's question, and then Zach's and Rodri. Awesome. So Julio, these two questions where I finished up kind of relates a little bit. So Julio asks, what does it take to become an accompanist in an orchestra? Does one have to start at a very early age to learn his instrument? Does one have to be a prodigy or a master at sight reading? Okay. So two answers. An accompanist, or the orchestra's pianist, has a very different job than piano soloist with orchestra. The piano soloists are usually never employed by the orchestra. They are guest artists. They're brought in. They are usually, extremely highly trained, years and years and years practicing, or they are prodigies. That's one answer. That's a separate thing. Now, you're asking specifically about being an accompanist in an orchestra or being the orchestra's pianist. No, I would say no, you don't have to start at an early age to have a position like that, to have a job like that. You don't need to be a prodigy. You absolutely do need to be a master of sight reading. And you have to have very well-trained ears. You have to be a very dynamic player, in that, not dynamics about loudness, but dynamic in that you can respond instantly and quickly to what you're seeing and basically what you're seeing. When you play with an orchestra, no matter what, whether you're the soloist or you're the pianist and you're near the percussion section of the orchestra, you never hear the orchestra like the audience does. Hey, Daisy, thank you so much, Daisy. So you never hear the rest of the orchestra. You never hear like the full package of music that the audience is getting. What you get is a little bit of the players that are closest to you, and everything else that's happening is like on a delay. Because, for example, if you're the pianist and let's say the cello opposite orchestra of you, all the way across the stage, they have a melody line, and that melody line is cueing something you need to do, you're not going to be able to hear them play it in real time over the 40 people, maybe more, that are between them and you. And what usually happens is what you hear has already bounced off the back wall of the hall and then come back to you. And if you play in time with what you hear, it is not going to be in time with the orchestra as a whole. So you have to be really aware of kind of turning off some things, at least in my experience is what I found, turning off our ears to a certain degree, knowing what not to listen to and knowing what to listen to, and also being extremely aware of the conductor's gestures and what they exactly mean. And a lot of instrumentalists, conductors, the upbeat, they cue a downbeat, and it seems like a lot of the actual beat happens at more like the top of a gesture and not on what's called the ictus, or the down motion, or the bottom. So every conductor is different. And if it's your position, if it's your job, you're obviously going to get a lot of practice watching that person, and you're going to be really in tune with what they do. As a soloist, it kind of flips around. We do a little bit of following, and they do a little bit of following, and so it's not quite the same story. But that, I think, would be the most difficult thing. One, sight reading, because you're going to get a call about the gig probably a month or two before it happens. And when that happens, you'll probably it's going to be a 20-minute piece or a 30-minute piece. You're not going to be playing the whole time. You're going to have to learn it very, very quickly, because your first rehearsal is going to be a week later. No one's going to be sight reading, probably. Or if they are, they're going to be really, really, really good at it. And so that's more important. Most of the time, if it's orchestral music with piano, like I can think of like Prokofiev in particular has stuff like that. There's more film music that has stuff like that. The piano writing itself is not going to be nearly as challenging or technically demanding as a soloist's piece, most of the time. And so that requirement is going to be probably less, but we're going to have to be really good at some other areas. That was a great question, Julio. Thank you. Sir Woolsey's very surprised. Yeah. So let's jump down. Let's see. Zoya says, which are the best ways to master playing the piano by ear? We're going to want to, my opinion on this, we're going to want to have a lot of auditory recognition of kind of what theory is. So we're going to really want to know, for example, going back to C, because that's just easy for everybody to use and to talk about. Well, we're going to want a great auditory and muscle memory recognition of, for example, all the triads in C, the arpeggios in C, and even if you do it in inversion. Sorry, I said triads, I meant inversions, but in chords. And then, of course, what are all of the chords that work in a particular key? So the bigger our language gets like that, the easier it's going to be to identify things by ear. And I'm assuming, Zoya, and I hope you're still here, Zoya, drop in the chat, are you trying to learn, what kind of music are you trying to learn by ear? Is it classical music, or is it pop music, or is it something else? That'll really help to answer my question. So if we are in the key of C, we want to have a great language that we can play with. So I know that the 1 chord is C, the 4 chord is F, the 2 chord is D minor, the 5 chord is G, the 6 chord is A, that covers most things. The 3 chord is E minor, right? And the 7 chord almost never gets used. It's diminished, so it'd be B diminished. B diminished and G, the 5 chord, are super, super similar. So Zoya says, I'm a music producer who composes pop music. Great, okay. So if you want to play by ear, or you want to play or write music and do more of that kind of stuff, write music by ear, let's build that language up. So in pop music in particular, 4 of the chords are by far the most important. You probably already know this, but the 1 chord, C, the 4 chord, F, the 5 chord, G, and the 6 chord, A and C. If we change keys, we can know all of that same stuff. Or we can just simply, if we're composing, we can just say, okay, I can find those chords easily. Those are like the building blocks of all pop music. Now, there are, of course, other chords used, and there's more, I'll call them like color chords, for example. And usually those are a combination of people find something that sounds good and they like it, and they don't usually know how it relates to the key. Or there's a little bit of like jazz theory that comes into play. One thing that sometimes gets used in pop music, if we're back in C, is something called the tritone substitution. And that would be taking the tritone, which is a specific interval. It's between an interval of a 4th and a 5th, and using a chord built on the tritone of the 5 chord. So the 5 chord's G. Here's G. If we go up to the tritone between 4th, there's 4th, there's 5th, there's the tritone. It sounds weird in that context, but if we build a chord on it, and we do this instead, let's see. Yeah. There's a tritone substitution. I played the 4 chord. I played a chord built on the tritone instead of the 5 chord, so it's why it's called substitution. And then I resolved to the 1 chord. So there's stuff used like that all the time. So in order to play by ear and write more by ear, I would really recommend getting to know parts of that language, the theory behind it. And then we can do so much stuff. Find the chords that have notes in common, like the C chord, just in a simple triad, has 2 notes in common with the A minor chord. That's the 6th chord. Let me see. I'm putting in a different key, so I hope I don't get a copyright strike for this. That's a super popular Adele song from maybe 10 years ago now. It's normally in A. I'm playing it in C. So it's the 1 chord. The bass note goes down to the 3 chord. This is just E minor. Then we go to the 6 chord, A minor. And we go to the 4 chord. How I can do that by ear is because of that knowledge of the language. So I can take it from A, which is normally where it happens, and I can change the keys around and do whatever I want. So that's where I would start. Zoya, does that answer your question? Feel free to follow up with me, and if you've got a follow-up question, just drop it in. I want to make sure that I get that question answered for you. I love writing pop music. I don't talk about it much on the channel here, but it's something I actually quite enjoy. So Zoya, I'll give you a few minutes to think about that, and I'll come back to you if you've got a follow-up question. Zach said, hey, I tend to struggle playing the chord extensions and inversions. I get stuck at simple voicing. Awesome. Thank you, Zoya. Thanks. So Zach says, I get stuck at the simple voicings and triads. Any ways to add colors to playing? Okay. Let's see. Let's change things over to maybe... Let's change keys. Let's try D for a little bit, just to get out of C. So Zach, what I would do instead of worrying too much about the theory, we've talked a lot about theory in some cases. If you know the theory, and the theory is now the thing that's holding you back, where we feel like you said, you get stuck. The first thing I would do is make sure, are we stuck on just root position triads, or are we using inversions and all of that kind of stuff? The first place I would look is simply adding inversions to our playing. We can even keep root position in the left hand. Not root position, just the root of the chord. We can keep that in the left hand. We can change voicings in the right hand. For example, that's a really nice sounding, quite simple chord in D. It's just a D triad, but the top, the right hand is playing in second inversion. And that already sounds a lot nicer than just that, which is pretty simple. The next thing I would do is maybe write yourself some chord progressions and say, come up with them in root position if that's easy. So for example, let's do, how about D, F sharp. So this is 1, 3, 6, 4. I think that's what I just played for the Adele song. But so 1, 3, 6, 4. Now, I'm going to start the right hand in inversion. So we'll start in second inversion. Where is the closest possible way that I can shift the notes in the right hand to the next chord? So if I want to play F sharp minor next, all I have to do is actually move one note from here, the middle note, because the other two notes of the chord are shared. So this actually goes back to one of the first questions I answered today. If we can see where harmonies share notes, then especially as we're writing, we can really just... The closest possible position is how it's usually taught in classical music. Moving to closest possible position is usually really nice voice leading, and it sounds great. Now if I want to go to 6, I only have to move by step in the right hand. If I want to move to 4, it's just by step in the right hand. Sure, the left hand is bouncing around, right? That would be the first place I would look, Zach. What can we do with more inversions? Let me know if that's helpful. I don't want to... You said chord extensions. So I don't want to give you way overwhelming information. So was that too beginner of an answer, Zach? Or do you want more info than that? Because extensions, I'm thinking things like the 9, 11, 13, stuff like that. So let me know, Zach. I'll give Zach a second here. And let me see if there's, while he answers, Is there a quick question? Rodri's was the next question. We got a couple music producers here today. This is great. Rodri asks for favorite chord progressions that have unique and special resolutions for being a producer and composer. Gosh, I don't know if I have any favorites off the top of my head. When I write, I guess I try not to do similar things over and over again. And so, but one of the things that I just start with is simply experimenting around. So, how can we resolve? So if we're sticking in the key of D, what are ways that we can get back to D? There are a lot of different ways that we can get there. So let's say, that's pretty simple, but because of how the bass line moves and it doesn't go to root position, so that's just resolving up by step instead of using the 5 chord, for example, or going root position, and things like that. There's something else we can go to here. There's, of course, something that I like to use all the time. I don't know exactly how this would work in well, maybe it'll work. Using the flat 6 and flat 7 chords. I love that kind of stuff. So if I'm in D major again, flat 6 is B flat, flat 7 is C major, D major. We could even just use one of the chords and just pull that out of the texture. So let's say we're in G. So there's a couple answers for you, Rodri. I don't really have favorite ones. I experiment around and I move voices around and I see what's happening. The other thing you could try to do is something Rodri called mode mixture. So take a chord. Maybe if you're writing a chord progression and it feels too boring and it feels too like usual over and over again. Hey, piano tal. And if it feels just like the same thing, pick out one of the chords that you've used and flip the mode. So if it's major, make it minor. If it's minor, make it major. See how that, 1, if it works, 2, how it changes what your ear is doing, and 3, does the chord progression still stand? Has it changed it enough? Or does that mode mixture make you want to write something else instead? So let's say we're again in D. The 4 chord that's normally used is G. What if we use G minor? Now we get a totally different kind of sound. We got there not by thinking about the key and what's diatonic and not and what works and not, but simply by saying, here's 2 common chords, and I'm just going to flip the mode, major to minor. Yeah? And that's kind of a cool way to go about things. You could do it on a whole lot of different chords. So Rodri, I hope that was helpful for you. Oh, cool. So we have a question in from Kai and from Piano Tal. So Kai's got a question about recommendations for pieces that revolve around major 7 chords. Kai, I don't have any off the top of my head that revolve around major 7 chords, especially not in the classical repertoire. I would look at jazz things. We're going to have a lot more use of major 7, first of all, in jazz repertoire. But going, let's say, revolving from a major 7 and then using a lot of major 7s, gosh, I can't think of anything off the top of my head because major 7 means that there's either a lot of changing the tonicization, or what key we're in, or what we feel the key that we're in, because major 7 only works on a handful of chords in a key. And that's part of the reason why I can't think of a lot of examples. So the examples that do exist are going to be in jazz where we rotate keys as well. So there's another answer for you. If you can find a piece that has a lot of movement or tonicization of keys. Tonicization means we feel like for a short time we're in another key, but we haven't actually modulated there. So if you have... I'm sorry, I feel like I'm letting you down, Kai. But I think that's the best answer I can give you. Look through the jazz repertoire. That's going to be by far the a place where that's going to happen more often. We're more often going to go through different tonicizations and feeling like we're in different keys as we move around. But even so, there's not going to be we're not going to spend a massive amount of time moving from major 7 to major 7 to major 7. There's going to be a lot of diminished and minor 7s thrown in with upper extensions. So Kai, you might be able to do a Google search for that. And the other thing I would do is if you look through jazz lead sheets, get a real book and look through the lead sheets, and anything on real books. In real books, anytime you have a major chord, it's either going to, there are a couple different ways it's written. Sometimes you get a capital M with the 7, like we'd normally see it. Sometimes it's a triangle with the 7. That also means major 7. So take some time and scan quickly through. You'll be able to look through a ton of pieces in a real book, just page after page after page, looking for the capital M or a triangle, see how often it appears. That would be my best suggestion. In the classical repertoire, I really cannot think of anything. We just move away from that tonality so quickly. When it does happen, it goes somewhere else very, very fast. We have Sergei Rachmaninoff joining us today. Sir Wolseley had another question. I'm going to come back to that, Sir Wolseley. I want to jump in and talk with Piano Tal real quick. Piano Tal asked to give some tips on the Bach well-tempered clavier. Piano Tal, if you have a specific piece in mind, I would love to hear a question about it. I can give some really general tips. I'll give some really general tips. And then we'll jump back into some other questions. Most important in the well-tempered clavier, both in the preludes and especially in the fugues. Sergei's question, why is C, C? Let me see if I can think of an answer for that, Sergei. So in the Bach well-tempered clavier, both in the preludes and especially in the fugues, we want to have an intimate understanding of all of the voice leading. So normally the fugues are the one we think about this because fugues are written in multiple voices. The simplest in the well-tempered clavier are in 3 voices. The most complex are in 5. Most of them are in 4. Those voices can basically be summed up as like soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Sometimes they voice cross. Sometimes voices are omitted. Sometimes they're in unison. We want to have a super great understanding of what every voice in every piece does. And the most common way that this is done in scores is to use different colored highlighters and highlight all the different voices. The other thing that I really love doing when studying Bach is to be able to play all of the voices separately. Maybe not memorized. That's quite a challenge, but know exactly the A sense and D sense and the what's the word I'm looking for? The dissonance and the resolution, and how each voice is working on its own. So learn how that all works. Each voice is going to make a beautiful shape, because Bach was a genius. And even crazier, he wrote preludes and fugues like so quickly. He could improvise them. Cataclysmo's here as well. Hey, Cataclysmo. So really, really dive in and dissect what each voice does, especially in the fugues. The preludes still have voices, and they still have fantastic voice leading. So we still want to see what is happening. So that's the first biggest tip. Really dive in, learn every voice separately, be able to play them separately. And then, of course, the trickier part, when we put them all together, we have to be able to continue to sing each voice like its own melody, knowing where in the texture it needs to pop out and be most important, the most important part of the ensemble, if we're still thinking about it as a 3, 4, or 5 person vocal ensemble. Who is the most important person at a time? Bring that out of the texture. There are so many different schools of thought about about that. And the most common one is that as voices ascend in their register, they're going to be brought out more. So, for example, if the tenor voice is singing in the alto register, it's probably very important. And the alto voice is not as important. So we're going to bring out what the tenor voice would have been. If we think about it in orchestral terms, we've also got violin 1, violin 2, viola, and cello. XCD, hey XCD. This is really live. I don't know why the speed is 2x. Unless you're joining us from a little bit prior. Let's go back. So I'm just looking through the comments here. Oh, so we were talking about the well-tempered clavier. Let's see. One other general comment that I have that's really important, and this relates to where we just left off, thinking about the voices as being instruments instead of human voices. There are many times when we need to change articulation of especially things in eighth notes. The rhythmic denomination really varies greatly. Let's just say when the rhythmic denominations are lower in the well-tempered clavier, we have more choices about how we articulate those. And very often, especially in the bass, in the left hand, in the bass voice, or in the cello voice, we can play things as if they're pizzicato on the instrument. If we remember back in Bach's time, instruments were completely different. And so if, for example, the well-tempered clavier was performed on pipe organ, the only way to really differentiate voices and create more space, we didn't have as much dynamic control. So the way to do that was by changing articulation, and we can still do that on the modern piano today. So if we change articulation, some things are legato, very legato, and some things are more pizzicato-like, slightly detached, things like that. So I guess going back to Piano Tal's question, those are my general tips for playing well-tempered clavier. Be really aware of all of the voices and have an intimate understanding of them, and let's start to think orchestrally or instrumentally as if the instruments are not a keyboard instrument themselves, and how that changes our interpretation. We've gotten a ton of other questions here. This is great. Let's see. Tiago's question came in next. Tiago's been playing for 10 months, recently learned Chopin's Prelude in E minor, which is a milestone. Awesome. And you want to compose simple pieces. Where to begin? Left hand, right hand, software versus piano. I would I would absolutely begin at the piano, not in a piece of software. Software is going to, there are some good things about it in that you can have things played back that you might not be able to execute yourself. The problem is, depending on what you write, someone else might not be able to execute it either. It might not simply be playable. And there are a lot of composers, even composers later in their musical journey that are pretty advanced, if they don't write at the instrument they're writing for, they very, very likely write we'll call it for the piano, unpianistic things. And with relatively little point. And I've played some things like that where the point of the music is fairly straightforward, but what the composer asks the pianist to do is incredibly taxing. And it doesn't lead us anywhere. It's not like Liszt's a big, big emotional climax to a Liszt piece where hands are flying and everything. Liszt is super pianistic, even though there's a massive amount of notes. Chopin is super pianistic, even though there can be a massive amount of notes. So that would be my first suggestion. Definitely write at the piano. Second, study. So for example, you have played Chopin's Prelude in E minor. That's fantastic. Take a minute and make some notes. What can you comprehend about the piece and how it was composed that makes it so beautiful? There are so many directions we could go with that. So I'll leave it there. If you were my composition student, that would be your assignment for a week. Go back, look at the piece itself. Let's analyze everything. When things move by a second, what does that evoke in us? When things resolve back to the same pitch in the melody, but they don't resolve in the harmony, what does that evoke in us? Beyond that, what are the harmonies used? When are they used? What emotional impact do they make on us? Right? So make the most comprehensive list you can about that piece. And that's even easier for you to do because you've already played it and you've already studied it. And you could take that further in the future as you want to do more and more composition. Pull out pieces that you like to listen to, even if you haven't played them. Get a copy of the score and really dive into analyzing if a certain phrase or certain section in the piece makes you feel something in particular. Why? Why did it happen? What were the tools that the composer used to evoke that? A lot of times the most inspired stuff by composers have an intimate knowledge of tools, but we don't always consciously think about applying them. They kind of, at the most inspired times, it just happens, right? And so you talk to a lot of composers that say that, right? Tonal music, that's going to be something that you'll hear, I think, regularly. Ideas happen. They just flow out of us. And then sometimes when we want to figure out what just happened, we'll analyze it a little bit, and then we can recreate it. But we can use that really, really to study. So pull apart what a composer did, whether it was purposefully thoughtful or inspired, it's not going to matter. We can learn a tremendous amount from that kind of information. All right. Let's see, what else do we have here today? Let's see. Sergei Rachmaninoff, he learned the Hungarian Rhapsody, the second Hungarian Rhapsody in 1 week. That deserves a round of applause, Sergei. I don't know, Sergei, your question, maybe you can answer it for us. Why is C, C? Maybe other people can chime in too. Why do you think C is called C? So Zoya had another question here. Zoya says, you tend to struggle playing melodies with the right hand along with chords on the left. Any way to practice melodic playing? You tend to play a lot more chords. So Zoya, I would first say practice right hand by itself, practice melodies by themselves. It could be on a piece of music that you're working on. It could be, yeah, Zoya, it could be something that if you're composing something, write a great melody line. Challenge yourself to write a great melody line. What does that entail? And you can write it in your DAW first if you want to, and then play it. Master playing it. Master playing it like if you do music that's supposed to be sung by somebody, if it's got lyrics, try to play it like the vocalist would sing it. What are their inflections? And only do one hand. Just do one note, one hand at a time. The other thing, Zoya, that really, really helps is if you sing. Or if you learn how to sing or experience a little bit of what singing is about. That doesn't quite help us with the execution of playing it against chords in the right hand. But in the meantime, if we can learn what breath feels like and what it feels like when we sing a line, we're going to gain an understanding in our bodies of what melody feels like that no one could ever tell us. That's really, really the best way to go. And once we can feel that and we start to understand what it feels like, we can express it through our fingers way better. Otherwise, even if you have a teacher telling you stuff, they're just telling you and they're saying, well, play this one louder, and then we get softer. We might dynamically create a nice shape, but it doesn't have any meaning because we don't know why we did everything that we just did. So the best thing to do is to feel it. And then to follow up on that, Zoya, you said, when someone asks you to play a piece and all you know are chords. As you start to put the two hands together, just play one chord per change in the left hand. So one chord in the left hand, play melody in the right. If you have to even split them in time to start with, that's just fine. Chord in the left hand, and whatever the melody is in the right hand, go for that. And then again, when we change chords, we can split it, or we can try to play the first note of both at the same time in both hands. But I wouldn't make it any more complicated than that. We don't have to, if the struggle is really playing melody, we don't need to practice playing a pattern in the left hand. We don't need to practice making it more rhythmic. That'll come more naturally later. So just get one chord in, start to play a melody with the right, and keep going like that. Yeah, and you can do that on your own stuff and on anything else. So if somebody asks you to play a song, a well-known song, then yeah, it's a whole different ball game to play it by ear and to improvise it instantly. So yeah, let's just start with when we have time to think about it and we have time to practice. That's where we can go. So Julio says, thanks. Awesome. Your dream is to play in an orchestra. That's really, really cool. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, just keep sight reading, like you said. Keep sight reading. You can make it a challenge to sight read something every day. And that'll slowly get better and better and better and better. And just like everything else that we practice so that we work on, the only thing that will improve that is just time and practice. So Sir Wolseley said, have you watched the masterclass on the Prelude in E by Seymour Bernstein? I don't even think I've watched that one. But Seymour Bernstein is a fantastic pianist and interpreter of music. Really, really, really good. Really good stuff. So yeah, I would recommend that too. Let's see here. Is it a Cashman? Am I getting that right? A Cashman? E. Cashman? I'm sorry if it's really wrong. I hope I did a good job pronouncing your name. They say, when you harmonize a melody, how do you make the melody more exciting and expressive? So if we're trying to do that with harmony, if we're trying to make the melody more expressive with harmonic choices, then we're going to have to stray from our typical diatonic chords, or we're going to have to put things in inversion, or we're going to have to add sevens or extensions. That's an easier answer. But if you want to, when you harmonize a melody, how do you make the harmony? I think I misunderstood that question. I just read it wrong. How do you make the harmony more exciting and expressive? We want to kind of build some tools that we can look to. So can we arpeggiate things instead of playing a block chord? Can we, how can we add upper extensions? Can we add sevens and nines like I just kind of said? Do we know when things should be made more simple? So for example, if you're already harmonizing something and we're playing a pattern of notes, so let's say, so that's just something. We have an A minor chord to a B major chord, yeah? If we have a pattern or we're playing a consistent pattern over and over again, we can make great impact, one, by either changing it or by knowing when to just stop the pattern. Right? So what I'm trying to do there is just alternate between something that's moving in like triplets and then simple pausing. And pausing like that highlights what the melody is doing, because all attention gets shifted there. Gosh, there's so many answers. That is one. Another one would be knowing and understanding the strength and weakness when it comes to using root position and inversions. A lot of, what was the word you used here? Excitement and expressiveness. A lot of that kind of, those feelings come from well-crafted phrases that that make the listener wait for something, right? We have to wait for an arrival. We have to wait for the expressive moment to happen. And a lot of musical creation. Okay, thanks. I still don't know how to pronounce that. Ekashman. I'm sorry. I wish there was a way to hear you. I absolutely relate to that if you know my last name. I have heard my last name pronounced so horribly so many times in so many places. Gosh. Knowing how to, if we go back to your question, knowing how to prolong the waiting for something to happen, waiting for resolution, waiting or building to something. And a lot of times that is simply a matter of prolonging strong resolutions. So it sometimes has less to do with the actual choice of harmony, but one, how long we sit in one particular harmony before moving, and how it's structured. How far away from root position are we? If we play this chord, which I was just doing, that feels a lot less stable than something like that, right? So the first time, very, very simple changes. This is not in root position, and it's in a higher register. This is in root position, and it's in a lower register. And those two things, despite them both being A minor, simple triad, create extraordinarily different emotional responses from us, right? So I hope that answers your question about creating some more emotion, some more excitement. That was a great question. All right. So I think we can, Internet Privacy Advocate. Hey there. I'm pretty far, I've gotten pretty far lost in the chat here, but that's okay. So hi, Internet Privacy Advocate. Great to see you again. That's also a great, depending on the type of composition you're writing, Internet Privacy Advocate said, independent movement in the voices. That's a great tip. Yep. So Zoya says, I do sing. I'm currently trying to compose and produce your first album. Great. Well, that's exciting. That's super exciting. So if you're already a singer, sing along with a melody while you play it. If it's not written down, just take a little bit of time. This is going back to Zoya's question. Take a little bit of time, figure out the notes that you're singing. I know especially a lot of, let's say, pop songwriters, we can tend to sing things that are way more difficult to play on the piano, right? It comes out so naturally when we sing it, and then we try to play it, and it's not there because it doesn't work in our fingers the same way. So first of all, whatever you've got sung, maybe make a recording of that, so you can play it back on loop over and over again. Figure out what it is that you sang. Start to play it. Start to play it as best as you can. And this is all ear training, really. There is nothing to do with reading music or notation or anything like that. It's all ear training, and how can we link those two things together? So it's great that you're already singing, Zoya. We just want to bring some of that. It's not even a matter of knowledge. It's just what the human body experiences while singing is so different than what it experiences while playing. And we want to try to link some of those two. So Internet Privacy Advocate, you had a great answer there. B sharp isn't C. Depends on the key you're in. It's an augmented third in the key of E, and C would be the fourth. That's right. If it's written as B sharp, it's got a real specific reason to be written that way. That was Internet Privacy Advocate responding to Sergei Rachmaninoff from a question earlier today. Let's see here. And Bernadette, you've had some. Oh, Bernadette, you were following up with that. That's great. That's great. I'm just jumping through. Let's see. Maybe Internet Privacy Advocate says, maybe Charles knows. I'm trying to find out that question. Okay. Oh, gosh. So, Bernadette, I'm glad you're still here. So what you're talking about with Internet Privacy Advocate is, it's a little bit more complex, but it actually goes back to what we've talked about first thing today. So taking that example, G, why C is C? I mean, who knows? The better question is, why was C picked as the starting place to teach music, I think? Because C is not the first letter of the alphabet. Yeah. I have no idea why C is called C. And yeah, in most likely, I think this goes to what Internet Privacy Advocate was talking about. Pianos, keyboard instruments from earlier times did not start on an A at the bottom. They probably did not. I don't know what key they started on. I'd have to look at some photos and do a little research about that, but I don't know. It's easy to say why B sharp is not isn't C and or is C. There are answers to both of those, but why is C called C? Who knows? Something with Italian or German. I don't know. So Bernadette, you said way earlier, the third white key, because you were talking about how B sharp would be an augmented third from G. A third would be the third white key from G. That is, there's our second is A, and our third is B. Augmented means, just think about the word, augment. Augment means to make larger. If we make the third larger, if we make a major third larger, we get that note. So if that was written as G to B sharp, it would be called an augmented third. The reasons are slightly complex and go into theory. But it also sounds like a fourth. It sounds just like G to C because it actually is G to C. So if there was some other harmony built under that, like, there we go. So this would be E flat G. Depending on the key, could be E flat G, C sharp, B sharp. Depends on the key and the harmonic context. I don't know if that answered your question there or if it just made things incredibly more complex. But those are called enharmonic notes. When a single note, the same pitch, has two different names, we use those two different names all related to the theory and the function of the harmony that is built around that note. So that is why some things have two different names. So Bernadette says, yes, A is the first letter of the alphabet and the first white key on the bottom of the piano. C is the third and third white key. That's true. That's true, but it still doesn't explain how it came to be that way. So Internet Privacy Advocate says a lot of times amateurs misspell chords. That is absolutely true. And it actually, there are sometimes, I'm going to get back to some other questions in a second, but there are sometimes as a composer, I think about this all the time. If we're playing something and we write something that is far diatonically from the key that we're in, sometimes we misspell on purpose for the sake of readability. It really depends on what the point of the music is. So I always think about that when I compose something. I think about, is it, if I write harmonically accurate, whatever that chord happens to be, is it still going to look like what it feels like to play? Because I've played things, some kind of modern classical things that do not look like what they feel like to play. And that's very disconcerting. It's nice when it's for analysis, but it is not nice when it comes to actually sight reading and playing it. So I always try to strike a balance. And most often, actually, I will, on purpose, misspell something if it makes it easier to play. And my thought behind that is most people aren't going to analyze what this actually is. I know what it is I wrote. I'm just going to make it easier for them to sight read. But that's like a one chord, one bar in every 500 or 1,000 measures that I write. It's not all that often that something like that happens. So let's jump. Julio, is it a good idea to raise your hand a bit higher before striking the keys in order to play the piece, in order to play fortissimo? Or is there a better technique? So Julio, I'm a fan of using Bernadette. Great, it was great to see you. Awesome. I'm glad this was helpful for you, Bernadette, and I hope to see you again. We do these every 2 weeks, or we will from now on. So Julio was talking about, dynamics. I'm going to cover Julio's question, and then we're going to jump back down and Sir Wolseley's, and then I'm going to have to call it a day, unfortunately. I've got to jump off for a couple other things I've got going on. So we'll answer those two questions, and then we'll go from there. So talking about dynamics, Julio. There are a lot of different ways we can approach playing it more with more dynamic, and we can play with more dynamic from the key tops. This might clip on your side, but and it all has to do with how the mechanism articulates that all the way from the shoulder down through the arm, and then out through the fingers. So when everything's working together, I even do a little bit, I think you can see this, I do a little bit of prep motion most of the time, but we can articulate that from resting on the key tops, and it works fine. You'll notice that when I do that, there's the tiniest lift in my wrist as I transmit that energy. But the energy is really starting, at least for this chord, from up in the shoulder, and it comes down here. But the fingers are also moving. When we have really fast things to do, yes, I love playing from just over the key tops. But I don't, unless there's a lot of time, I don't think about raising the hands up. So if I have a lot of time, I might do something that's from more off the keys. But usually, even when I've got more time, it's actually a pretty small motion. Maybe an inch or two. An inch or two becomes the preparatory motion, like that. And I'll attack down from that position. So I am a fan of that. But a lot of times, if we have something faster to do, we don't have time to make that preparatory motion. So it has to kind of be built into the hand. And some of that has to do with rotation. So, for example, I'll show some people, and this will go into Sir Wolseley's question also about Chopin's first ballade. I'm actually learning the first ballade, Chopin's first ballade, for the first time right now. And so I'll use this as an example of some of playing fortissimo, depending on the technique. So the coda, at least that part is fairly easy to execute. But there's time, right? So I can approach things with that little prep and drop in. And even there, the top. The wrist is flexible and the arm is fluid. And there is an approach that is down from the top, from above. Now, when we get into the quicker part, let's see. This, I'm gaining the height off the key to play fortissimo by using either rotation, a lot of rotation. So even on this chord, there's so much happening. It's hard to sum up. I'll show you a couple things that are happening that aid with dynamics in this really fast section. So, first of all, I'm trying to maintain alignment in the arm. So when I play the upper notes, and actually if I was performing this, I'd be leaning over here too. So there is some rotation. There's actually a little bit of this movement from 5 over to 1. And there's also movement in the forearm here to make sure that I stay lined up. But when we do it in time, it happens so quickly that it's hard to see that. When we have the double repeated notes, I'm giving it's like a masterclass on the coda. When we have the double repeated notes, there's a couple things that are happening there. Because they both need to be strong. I'm actually aiming for the second one. And so I'm using the first one to bounce up a little bit and gain some height in the wrist. Right? Let me see, does that sum it up? Yeah, I think that sums up that bit. the second part of the coda here. I need to do more practice on that. But once again, the primary thing here is rotation. And so going back to your original question, even in this example, while I'm not I'm not attacking from above the keys with like a fully raised or floating position for the mechanism, I am creating tiny bits of height to drop into. Most of the time in really fast stuff, it's going to be about rotation, because even if, let's say we're on the second finger here and we need to play 5, if I simply rotate from to the left, I don't have to lift my second finger. I can play a very, very strong forte or fortissimo upper note. It's even more articulated between the octave, of course. But every interval that we have, right, we can rotate and gain a lot of that. Whereas if we're thinking about up and down only, we're going to lose so much efficiency in motion that we're not going to be able to play things very quickly. So when we can, it's of course easier if we've got time to just drop and use weight. And a lot of times when we need to play that loudly, that's a technique that we'll use when there's time, if there's big chords, like Sir Wolseley said, the Tchaikovsky. And when there's not time, we have to find ways of thinking about getting above the key is the wrong way to go about it. We want to find... Yeah, I know, Internet Privacy Advocate. If only they weren't almost $15,000, I would get new hammers. So we don't want to think about being above the key. We just want to think about how can we get the most energy into the key from our current position. And many times that has to do with rotation from the point where we are, right? So I think hopefully that answers your question, and it gave Sir Wolseley a little bit of preview of the coda of the ballade. So I think that's going to sum it up for today. Oh, Louise joined us right at the end. Hey, Louise. If you go back and if you have time, watch from the top. And great questions from everybody. Really good questions. Great to see all of you. Happy New Year, like we said at the beginning. Thanks to everybody that had questions. Julio, thanks for being here. Sir Wolseley, thanks for being here the whole time. Bernadette was for a long, long time. We had a lot of other people join in. A lot of music production questions, like songwriter questions today, which was cool. So, yes, so these, before everybody leaves, if you haven't already, please give the video a like. That helps out. And the schedule for these is shifted a little bit. Hey, Jose is here. These live streams are going to be the 2nd and 4th weeks, Wednesdays of the month from now on, because I now can never do them on the first Wednesday of the month. So if it happened that way, I would never be able to come on a live stream. So they'll always be the 2nd and 4th Wednesday. And stay tuned for if we do one in 2 weeks from now, because we're having some like major work done on the house. And so the whole studio might be torn down in 2 weeks, but I'll post some pictures and see what's going on. Internet Privacy Advocate says, publish a manual. I might just have to do that. I've gotten many requests for it over the last few months. So anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for those extra likes that just came in. And stay tuned. Hopefully I'll see you in 2 weeks. And remember, you can always submit to the masterclass portion, submit a video, and we'll talk about specifically what's going on. All right. Happy New Year. And until next time, I'll see you later.